The blaring digital shriek of an alarm clock at 5:30 a.m. shatters the dark. Next comes the desperate pour of a second cup of coffee before the sun has even fully risen. You find yourself hypnotically scrolling through unread emails while still lying in bed, your thumb moving out of pure muscle memory. Hours later, the harsh blue glow of a laptop illuminates an exhausted face long past midnight. This is the relentless drumbeat of the modern world, a kinetic blur of tasks, notifications, and endless obligations. Suddenly, the noise cuts out entirely, leaving an absolute, shocking silence. A gentle breeze moves slowly through the vibrant green leaves of an old oak tree. A heavy glass of dark red wine is poured deliberately onto a rustic wooden table. The screen of a silver laptop snaps shut with a definitive, satisfying click. What if the ultimate life hack isn't doing more, but aggressively stopping? We live in an era that has been entirely hijacked by the cult of the hustle. It is the invisible water we swim in, a pervasive ideology that has convinced us our human worth is directly tied to our economic output. Somewhere along the line, we collectively accepted the lie that productivity is the ultimate measure of personal value. If you aren't grinding, optimizing, or monetizing your free time, society whispers that you are somehow falling behind. This mindset has turned our very existence into an endless, exhausting performance where the curtain never drops. The physiological and psychological toll of this non-stop performance is absolutely staggering. We are currently living through a silent epidemic of exhaustion, with our bodies desperately keeping the score of a game we were never meant to play. Adrenal fatigue is no longer considered a fringe medical anomaly. It has become the baseline operating state for millions of working adults. Chronic anxiety and systemic burnout have become so incredibly normalized that we bond with our coworkers over our shared sleep deprivation. We wear our dark circles like badges of honor, proving to the world just how committed we are to the grind. The recent phenomenon known as the Great Resignation wasn't just a temporary shift in the global labor market. It was a collective, desperate gasp for air from a society drowning in its own unchecked ambition. People did not just quit their jobs. They were fleeing a lifestyle that had fundamentally broken their spirits. Yet, even when we change careers, we often bring the exact same frantic pacing into our new roles. We keep running on the treadmill of more, because we are trapped by the grand illusion of catching up. We constantly lie to ourselves, whispering, "I will finally rest when this massive project is finished." We believe peace will come when the inbox is finally at zero, or when the house is perfectly clean and organized. But the finish line is a cruel mirage that moves further away the faster you run toward it. The inbox is never at zero because the modern reward for finishing your work is simply being handed more work. If you wait for the world to generously grant you permission to rest, you will literally die waiting. You might be thinking, but I have the weekend. I take my days off to recover. But let's be brutally honest about what the modern weekend has actually devolved into. Saturday and Sunday are no longer sanctuaries of deep rest and rejuvenation. They have become the designated dumping grounds for everything you couldn't manage to get done from Monday to Friday. They are frantic, catch-up days, filled to the brim with grocery shopping, folding laundry, yard work, and managing side hustles. We simply trade our corporate labor for domestic labor, swapping our work-from-home sweatpants for our weekend chore clothes. A casual day off is not the same thing as true, restorative rest. A day off is just a brief pause in your primary hustle to service the secondary hustle of maintaining your adult life. By the time Sunday evening rolls around, the infamous Sunday scaries begin to creep into your chest. You return to work on Monday morning feeling just as depleted, if not more, than when you left the office on Friday. The modern weekend is fundamentally broken, having been entirely co-opted by the very productivity mindset we're trying to escape. To break this vicious cycle, a casual day off is entirely insufficient. We do not need a tropical vacation, and we do not need a long weekend getaway. What we desperately need is a radical boundary. We need a line drawn in the sand so deep and so absolute that the chaos of the modern world cannot cross it. This boundary requires a militant rebellion against the societal expectation of constant, unbroken availability. It requires us to look at the relentless machine of modern commerce and boldly say, no more. The antidote to our modern epidemic is not a new productivity app, a greener smoothie, or a better morning routine. The cure is ancient, predating the Industrial Revolution, the Internet, and the very concept of the corporate workday. It is the radical, forgotten practice of the Sabbath. For many people, that specific word carries heavy, restrictive religious baggage. It immediately conjures up childhood images of strict dogma, rigid rules, and solemn boredom. But if we strip away the rigid legalism and cultural baggage, a brilliant truth remains. We uncover a practice of profound anthropological and psychological genius designed specifically to protect human beings from themselves. To understand the raw power of this ancient technology, we have to look at the origins of the word itself. The Hebrew root word is asterisk Shabbat, and its definition is shockingly simple. It does not mean to relax, to chill out, or to take a nap on the sofa. It translates literally and forcefully to stop or to cease. It is an active, intentional, and aggressive halting of all production, striving, and manipulation of the world around you. The genius of asterisk Shabbat is that it forces you to step off the treadmill entirely, rather than just slowing the belt down. For thousands of years, ancient cultures understood that without a designated, unbreakable rhythm of cessation, we would eventually consume ourselves. The Sabbath was originally designed as a weekly sanctuary in time, an invisible fortress where human dignity is actively restored. It serves to remind us that we are not machines built for perpetual motion. We are biological creatures, deeply dependent on the natural rhythms of work and rest. Adopting the Sabbath today is the ultimate act of modern rebellion against a system that wants to commodify your every waking second. When you choose to aggressively stop in a world that demands constant motion, you reclaim your stolen autonomy. You boldly declare that your worth is inherent, not earned through the endless clearing of your digital inbox. It is a terrifying, yet profoundly liberating realization that the world will continue to spin even if you aren't actively pushing it. But stepping into this ancient rhythm requires a massive paradigm shift. Before we go any further into how this actually works, I want you to head down to the comments right now. Rate your current burnout level on a scale from 1 to 10 and be brutally honest about how exhausted you truly are. But taking a Sabbath isn't as simple as just sitting on the couch and hoping for the best. If you try it without understanding what it actually is, you will fail. In part 2, we uncover the forgotten blueprint of what true rest looks like. Picture a rapid time-lapse video of a typical Saturday afternoon in a modern living room. A visibly exhausted person collapses onto a soft couch, ostensibly ready to finally relax after a brutal work week. But watch their body language closely as the accelerated hours speed by. Their leg bounces with restless, kinetic anxiety. Their hand instinctively reaches for a glowing smartphone every 3 minutes, and their eyes nervously dart around the room at unfinished chores. Text flashes boldly across the screen. Why is doing nothing so exhausting? This is the modern tragedy of free time. We have completely forgotten how to actually rest, replacing it instead with a frantic, low-grade anxiety disguised as leisure. To truly understand the profound mechanics of the Sabbath, we must recognize that it is supported by two distinct, non-negotiable pillars. The first pillar is the absolute act of asterisk ceasing asterisk, which goes far beyond simply setting an out-of-office auto-reply on your email. True ceasing means halting all commerce, all unpaid domestic labor, and all attempts to manipulate or control the world around you. You are not buying groceries, you are not fixing the squeaky hinge on the bedroom door, and you are not balancing your monthly budget. For 24 hours, you radically accept the universe exactly as it is, without trying to improve, optimize, or conquer it. But ceasing is only half of the equation, and without the second pillar, the Sabbath simply becomes a sterile vacuum of boredom. The second, equally vital pillar is feasting or delight. This is where our modern conception of relaxation entirely misses the mark, as we often confuse the exhaustion of burnout with the need for total sensory deprivation. We mistakenly think rest means collapsing into a dark, quiet room and doing absolutely nothing until Monday morning. True Sabbath, however, is an incredibly active state of profound, resonant joy. This brings us to the crucial, life-altering difference between numbing and resting. After a brutal week of corporate grinding, it is incredibly tempting to order greasy takeout and binge-watch 7 consecutive hours of a true crime documentary. You might scroll through endless short-form videos until your eyes literally blur, desperately seeking a cheap dopamine hit to offset your deep exhaustion. But let's be perfectly, brutally honest with ourselves about what is actually happening. This is not rest. This is a digital anesthetic designed to numb the lingering pain of a life you actively want to escape. Numbing is a passive, consumptive activity that ultimately leaves you feeling groggy, disconnected, and hollow inside. Sabbath rest, on the other hand, is about being fiercely, vibrantly, and unapologetically alive. It is the conscious, deliberate pursuit of activities that fill your soul to the absolute brim. It is sharing a magnificent, slow meal with people you deeply love, listening to a beautiful piece of music with your full undivided attention, or walking silently through a dense, green forest. The goal is not to anesthetize yourself from reality, but to finally wake up to the beauty you've been too busy to notice. To protect this fragile, beautiful state of delight, the Sabbath requires militant, uncompromising boundaries. You cannot casually drift in and out of a Sabbath state, hoping the demanding world will simply leave you alone out of the goodness of its heart. The modern economy is an attention-hungry beast that will gladly consume your entire weekend if you leave the door even slightly cracked. This is why you must adopt the fierce mindset of a fortress commander actively defending a sacred citadel. You are engaging in the ancient practice of temporal architecture. Normally, we think of architecture strictly in spatial terms, pouring heavy concrete and raising steel to build houses, offices, and skyscrapers. But the Sabbath is the profound act of building a magnificent, towering cathedral in time rather than in physical space. You are carving out a specific, 24-hour block and erecting massive, invisible walls around it to protect your humanity. Inside this temporal cathedral, the oppressive rules of the outside world completely evaporate. Your financial net worth, your corporate job title, and your pending project deadlines have absolutely no jurisdiction within these walls. Imagine a simple graphic animation playing out on a digital whiteboard to illustrate this stark dichotomy. On the left side, we see the typical day off, represented by a circle with dotted, highly porous lines. Through those gaping holes, tiny visual icons of unread emails, towering laundry piles, and looming anxiety constantly bleed into the center, contaminating the space. On the right side is the Sabbath, depicted as a solid, glowing, impenetrable ring. Whatever chaos is happening outside, that ring simply bounces off the thick boundary, leaving the center completely peaceful and untouched. As you begin to plan what actually happens inside this glowing fortress, you will inevitably run into a massive conceptual roadblock. You have to clearly define what work actually means to you, and this is where the rules become deeply, beautifully personal. Work is not always defined by what earns you a taxable paycheck. It is defined by the underlying posture of your heart. What constitutes draining, soul-crushing labor for one person might be the ultimate source of life-giving delight for another. Consider the profound psychological difference between a professional landscaper and a remote software engineer. If a landscaper spends their Saturday digging in the dirt and planting heavy hedges, they are violating their Sabbath by continuing their vocational labor. However, if a software engineer who stares at glowing lines of abstract code all week spends Saturday tending to a garden, that same physical exertion becomes restorative. The dirt on their hands is not a symbol of commerce. It is a grounding, tactile connection to the physical world. The physical activity is exactly the same, but the internal reality is entirely different. The exact same principle applies to cooking, writing, playing music, or building furniture in your garage. A professional line cook slaving over a hot stove on their day off is working, while an accountant slowly simmering a rich, complex ragout for their family is feasting. To curate your own authentic Sabbath, You need to develop a highly sensitive internal compass. You must evaluate every potential activity against a strict, uncompromising rule of thumb. If an activity feels like an obligation, a transaction, or a chore, it absolutely does not belong in your Sabbath. The beauty of the Sabbath is that it forces you to aggressively interrogate your own hidden motives. If you are reading a dense nonfiction book solely to get ahead in your career, you are working. If you are going for a grueling run specifically to punish yourself for eating a donut, you are working. Sabbath activities must be entirely devoid of any calculated return on investment. They must be beautiful, joyful ends in and of themselves, completely untethered from the toxic, pervasive metric of modern productivity. You must strip away the societal conditioning that whispers every hobby must eventually be optimized, perfected, or monetized into a side hustle. If you love painting, paint terribly and throw the canvas away just to prove to yourself you aren't doing it for profit. The Sabbath demands a radical, rebellious commitment to utter uselessness. You are not resting to become a sharper, better worker for your boss on Monday morning. You are resting because you are a human being, and your joy is inherently worthy of existing. Before we move forward into the mechanics of making this happen, I want you to pause and reflect. Head down to the comments right now and share one single activity that makes you feel the most deeply, truly alive. So the rules are set. But what happens when you actually try to stop? Your brain is going to fight back. In part 3, we tackle the psychological detox and the massive wave of guilt you're going to feel. I guarantee you, your first Sabbath will feel absolutely terrible. You are going to feel intensely lazy, overwhelmingly guilty, and practically vibrating with an anxious, restless energy. But here is the profound, counterintuitive truth about that deep discomfort. It means the process is actually working. You are not failing at resting. You are actively experiencing the agonizing withdrawal symptoms of a deep physiological addiction. To truly detox from the hustle, we first have to face the terrifying silence that follows the grind. For years, you have inadvertently trained your brain to operate exactly like a desperate slot machine addict. Every time you check off a meaningless task, answer a late-night message, or clear a notification, your brain releases a tiny, potent hit of dopamine. This neurochemical reward system has completely hijacked your baseline state of being, conditioning you to crave constant, frantic motion. When you abruptly cut off that supply of productivity-induced dopamine by taking a Sabbath, your nervous system essentially panics. It interprets the sudden lack of forward momentum as a literal, physical threat to your survival. Think about the physical twitch in your fingers when you are forced to wait in line without looking at your smartphone. That microscopic anxiety is merely the tip of a massive neurological iceberg that the Sabbath forces you to crash into. When you remove the constant influx of digital stimulation and artificial urgency, your brain's reward centers go into acute shock. You are forcing a hard reset on a nervous system that has been redlining at maximum capacity for years. It is going to be incredibly uncomfortable, but that discomfort is the sensation of your brain literally healing itself. This neurological panic manifests as a bizarre psychological phenomenon we can call the phantom limb of productivity. Just as an amputee feels itching or pain in a missing arm, your brain will start generating fake emergencies to get you moving again. Suddenly, reorganizing your spice rack will feel like a life or death imperative that must be handled immediately. You will become intensely convinced that if you don't reply to a trivial email right this second, your entire career will evaporate. These are not rational thoughts. They are the desperate pleas of an addicted mind begging for its customary fix. During this withdrawal phase, the urge to simply pick up your phone and scroll will feel physically painful to resist. You will pace around your quiet house, feeling a deep, unsettling itch in your skin that only doing something can scratch. This is the exact moment where most people completely abandon the experiment, deciding that resting is simply too stressful to endure. But if you can white-knuckle your way through this initial, agonizing detox, the noise eventually begins to break. You just have to outlast the fake emergencies, until your nervous system realizes it is finally safe to power down. Once the neurological static starts to clear, an even deeper, more terrifying psychological battle begins. Stripped of your to-do lists, your impressive job titles, and your endless errands, you are forced to confront a haunting question. If you are not actively producing, fixing, or achieving something, who exactly are you? Modern culture has deeply indoctrinated us with the toxic, pervasive belief that I am what I produce. We have effectively reduced our entire human value to a cold, economic equation of input and output. This insidious mindset has gradually transformed us from human beings into frantic human doings. We feel an intrinsic, desperate need to justify our existence on this planet by constantly pointing to our tangible accomplishments. When you enter the Sabbath and deliberately stop producing anything of value, that justification is entirely stripped away. You are left sitting alone in a quiet room, entirely naked without the protective armor of your productivity. It is an incredibly vulnerable state, triggering a profound identity crisis that can shake you to your absolute core. This is why the early hours of your first few Sabbaths might involve staring blankly at a wall or pacing the floor in silence. You are actively grieving the temporary loss of the avatar you have built for the professional world. The title of manager, founder, or creator is suddenly irrelevant, leaving only the raw, unpolished version of who you truly are. Sitting with that unpolished self, perhaps with nothing but a journal and a pen, can feel incredibly intimidating. But pushing through that intimidation is the only way to rediscover the parts of your soul that the hustle culture buried. This crisis is exactly where the deepest, most permanent psychological healing actually takes place. The Sabbath is not just a recovery tool. It is a radical, identity-forming practice designed to rebuild your self-worth from the ground up. By intentionally stepping away from the controls of your life for 24 hours, you are running a crucial, terrifying experiment. You are daring to test the hypothesis that the universe does not actually require your constant supervision to function. And the results of this weekly experiment are always spectacularly, beautifully humbling. You wake up the next morning and realize the world did not violently spin off its axis just because you stopped pushing it. Your family still loves you, your friends still value you, and the sun still rose, entirely independent of your hustle. You begin to internalize the profound truth that you are deeply loved and inherently valuable simply for existing. You do not have to constantly pay rent for your space on this earth with your exhaustion and your burnout. Despite this beautiful realization, the internal critic inside your head will not go down without a vicious, bitter fight. As you sit looking out the window or taking a slow, solitary walk, a loud, nagging voice will inevitably call you lazy. It will cruelly list all the productive things you should be doing instead of wasting time staring at the trees. To survive the Sabbath, you have to develop the mental fortitude to look that voice dead in the eye and completely ignore it. You must actively and aggressively reframe your definition of laziness. Laziness is a failure to do the work that is required of you in the appropriate season of labor. Sabbath, however, is the deliberate, disciplined cessation of work in the appropriate, sacred season of rest. Choosing to honor your biological limits is not a moral failure. It is an act of profound wisdom and self-respect. When that guilty voice flares up, you must counter it by reminding yourself that rest is never a luxury. It is a fundamental human requirement, just as critical to your survival as breathing, eating, and drinking water. One of the most effective tools to silence this internal critic is to physically speak your new boundaries out loud. When the guilt creeps in, verbally remind yourself, I'm off the clock, and the world is safe without my intervention. It sounds absurdly simple, but verbalizing the boundary helps short-circuit the anxiety loop spinning silently in your head. You have to actively parent your own panicked mind, offering it the firm reassurance it desperately craves. Over time, that frantic, guilty voice will lose its volume, eventually fading into a quiet, steady peace. This requires a massive paradigm shift in how we fundamentally view the relationship between work and rest. We have been conditioned to believe that resting is a rare, elusive reward that we must painstakingly earn through grueling, exhaustive labor. We view it as the tiny carrot dangling at the end of a punishing, endless stick. But this framework is entirely backward, keeping us perpetually starved for recovery and constantly running on fumes. We must invert the equation entirely to survive the modern world. Rest is not the reward for a lifetime of hard work. Rest is the foundational baseline from which all good, meaningful work flows. You do not rest because you finally finished everything. You rest because you are human and you will need the strength to begin again. By making the Sabbath your anchor, you stop trying to squeeze recovery into the leftover margins of your exhausted life. You prioritize the sanctuary first, allowing your creativity, your empathy, and your energy to naturally refill. This mindset shift is the hardest, most vital hurdle to clear in your journey away from burnout. You must conquer the internal guilt before you can ever hope to enjoy the external peace. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next crucial step in this process. Now that we've conquered the mindset, it's time for execution. How do you actually pull off 24 hours of zero work in a world that never stops? I'll give you my exact step-by-step blueprint in part 4. Imagine a screen split right down the middle, showing two radically different Friday nights. On the left, a person is desperately trying to unwind on the couch, but the kitchen sink behind them is overflowing with dirty dishes. Their laptop is open on the coffee table, pinging with late-in-the-day notifications, and a pile of unfolded laundry sits menacingly in their peripheral vision. On the right side, the physical space is entirely transformed into a sanctuary of calm. The countertops are wiped clean, a single candle flickers warmly on a cleared dining table, and a glowing smartphone is deliberately placed inside a wooden drawer that clicks shut. You simply cannot experience profound, restorative rest in an environment that is constantly screaming at you to work. The absolute biggest mistake people make when attempting their first Sabbath is treating it like a spontaneous day off. They wake up on a Saturday morning, declare they are finally going to rest, and immediately trip over a vacuum cleaner. Within minutes, they realize there is no food in the fridge, the dog needs walking, and the utility bills are overdue. True rest requires an invisible scaffolding of intense, deliberate preparation to hold the boundary in place. Historically, ancient cultures understood this intimately, designating the day before the Sabbath strictly as the preparation day. If you want to experience 24 hours of total peace, you have to aggressively front-load your domestic and professional obligations. Think of this preparation phase as a tactical sprint before the finish line, a highly focused burst of productive energy. You have to run the errands, buy the groceries, and meal prep the food before the boundary officially drops. You fold the mountain of laundry and scrub the kitchen sink so it doesn't subconsciously haunt you tomorrow. By doing all of this heavy domestic lifting in advance, you are actively purchasing your own future freedom. This exact same principle applies to your professional life and the digital tethers that bind you to your career. You must set a firm, uncompromising out-of-office auto-reply on your email, explicitly stating when you will return. You clear any critical bottlenecks by Friday afternoon, ensuring no one is desperately waiting on your approval to move forward. It is about systematically closing the open loops in your brain that generate low-grade, persistent anxiety. When the clock finally strikes the designated hour, there should be absolutely nothing left hanging over your head. Once the physical environment is secured and the emails are automated, you face the most critical moment of the entire week. You cannot just casually slide into a Sabbath. You have to decisively step across a defined threshold. Your brain requires a definitive, physical trigger to signal that the rules of the hustle have officially been suspended. Without a clear commencement ritual, the frantic energy of the workweek will inevitably bleed right into your sacred time. You need a sensory experience that draws a hard, undeniable line in the sand between producing and simply existing. For many, this vital transition begins with the digital sunset, a deliberate powering down of all work-related devices as evening approaches. You physically turn off the laptop, mute the smartwatch, and place the devices in a different room entirely. Then, you replace the harsh blue light of the digital world with something warm, tangible, and deeply human. You might light a specific, designated candle that is only ever used for this exact moment of the week. The strike of the match and the smell of the smoke act as a powerful olfactory cue that the boundary is up. This transition is often cemented by sharing a rich, decadent meal that you intentionally look forward to all week. You might pour a glass of your absolute favorite wine, put on a curated playlist of beautiful music, and sit down at a properly set table. The moment that glass is raised or that first bite is taken, the fortress walls go up, and the world is officially locked out. You are no longer rushing to finish dinner so you can get back to a spreadsheet. The meal itself becomes the main event, a slow, deliberate celebration of the life you have worked so hard to build. The traditional timing for a Sabbath is a full 24-hour block, typically running from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. Starting at sundown is psychologically brilliant because it means you begin your rest by going to sleep. You do not kick off your sacred time by trying to force yourself into a state of active relaxation. Instead, you surrender to your biological limits, fundamentally resetting your internal clock through a long, uninterrupted night of deep sleep. When you wake up the next morning, you are already deeply embedded inside the boundary, safe from the morning rush. As the daylight hours unfold, you have to navigate the modern world using a completely different set of rules. The primary directive is simple but ruthlessly difficult. Absolutely no commerce and no screens that demand a response. This means you do not open an app to casually browse for a new coffee maker, and you do not step foot inside a grocery store. You actively refuse to participate in the transactional economy, stepping out of the consumer mindset entirely for one full day. Social media is also heavily restricted, if not entirely banned, because it is an algorithmic machine designed to harvest your attention and trigger comparison. The rules of engagement must also extend to the actual conversations you have with your family and friends. You have to set strict conversational boundaries, agreeing to completely ban any talk about stressful work projects or upcoming financial planning. If a friend starts venting about office politics, you gently but firmly remind them that you are off the clock. You are actively creating a safe verbal zone where the anxieties of the future and the regrets of the past simply do not exist. You only discuss things that bring you life, joy, and deep relational connection. However, you are absolutely going to mess this up, and you need to anticipate the inevitable slip-ups. You will instinctively reach into your pocket for a phone that isn't there, or you will accidentally start discussing a looming deadline over lunch. When this happens, the worst possible reaction is to fall into a spiral of rigid legalism and self-punishment. The Sabbath is designed to be a life-giving gift, not a suffocating prison sentence of strict, unbreakable rules. When you catch yourself working or worrying, simply laugh at your own deep conditioning, gently redirect your attention, and step back into the rest. Perfection is never the goal. The goal is simply building a weekly rhythm of resistance against a culture that wants to consume you. So, I am challenging you to look at your calendar right now and carve out your first 24-hour block for this upcoming week. Pick the day, plan the preparation phase, and decide exactly what your commencement ritual is going to look like. It will be messy, it will feel deeply unfamiliar, but it will be the most important thing you do all year. You are finally going to experience what it feels like to just be a human being again, fully alive and deeply present. You will survive the initial detox, you will hold the boundary, and you will finally taste true restorative rest. But what happens when the sun eventually sets, the candle burns out, and the demands of Monday morning inevitably roll around? You might think this is just a temporary escape, a fleeting pause before the crushing weight of reality returns. But the true magic of this ancient technology actually happens when the boundary drops and you re-enter the chaotic world. In our final episode, we look at the shocking way this single day of rest completely transforms the other six. What if I told you that by deliberately choosing to work 6 days instead of 7, you will actually get more done, have significantly better ideas, and finally start liking your life again? It sounds like a massive contradiction to everything modern hustle culture constantly preaches to us. We are deeply conditioned to believe that subtracting 24 hours of grinding will automatically put us permanently behind our peers. But the math of human energy does not function like a simple spreadsheet or a factory assembly line. When you finally implement the radical boundary of the Sabbath, a profound, almost magical alchemy takes place within your mind and body. The transformation doesn't just happen during your day off. It violently and beautifully ripples out into the rest of your week. For years, you have likely been operating through a thick, persistent haze of chronic brain fog. You stare at your computer screen for hours, willing yourself to focus, but your cognitive engine is constantly misfiring. This happens because your exhausted brain has zero margin to process, categorize, and file away the massive influx of daily data. By aggressively stopping for one full day, you finally give your neurological filing system a chance to catch up. The mental clarity that returns on Monday morning is nothing short of startling. Think about the classic shower thought phenomenon, where your best ideas arrive precisely when you stop trying to force them. The Sabbath creates this exact same psychological effect, but on a massive macro scale. When you step completely away from a complex problem and refuse to think about it for 24 hours, your subconscious goes to work. It quietly connects disparate dots, analyzes patterns, and generates brilliant solutions while you are out hiking or sharing a meal. You return to your desk not just rested, but armed with a level of creative insight that endless grinding could never produce. This is the ultimate paradox of true productivity that the hustle bros completely misunderstand. You do not achieve greatness by squeezing every last drop of blood from the stone of your daily schedule. You achieve it by intentionally creating vast, empty spaces where brilliance actually has the room to breathe. The Sabbath acts as a massive reset button for your dopamine receptors, making deep, focused work feel entirely effortless again. But the most profound ripple effect of this ancient practice has absolutely nothing to do with your career or your economic output. The Sabbath is, quite literally, a desperate rescue mission for your closest, most vital human relationships. When we are chronically burned out, the people we love the most inevitably get the absolute worst versions of us. We snap at our partners, we half listen to our children, and we cancel plans with our friends because we are simply too tired to engage. Exhaustion makes us inherently selfish, trapping us in a constant, low-grade survival mode that destroys intimacy. When you commit to a day of rest, you're giving your family the ultimate, irreplaceable gift of your undivided presence. Without the looming anxiety of a buzzing phone or an impending deadline, you can finally look people directly in the eye. You rediscover the lost art of lingering around a dinner table, listening deeply without silently planning your next task. The deep empathy and profound patience that chronic stress systematically destroys begin to naturally bloom again in your heart. You suddenly have the emotional bandwidth to actually care about the nuanced details of the lives intertwined with yours. Your home slowly stops feeling like a frantic, logistical command center where passing roommates merely coordinate their busy schedules. It transforms back into a sanctuary of connection, a place where laughter isn't immediately shushed by the demands of remote work. The people around you will notice this beautiful shift long before you even articulate what you are actively doing. They will feel the sudden, warm return of the person they fell in love with, the parent they adore, and the friend they missed. One day of absolute presence has the power to heal months of unintentional, stress-induced neglect. As this practice takes root, a foundational shift occurs in how you orient your entire existence. For your whole adult life, you have been resting from your work, using your weekends merely to recover enough to survive Monday. The Sabbath flips this toxic paradigm entirely upside down, teaching you to live and work from a place of deep rest. You begin your week completely full, tackling your responsibilities from a posture of abundance rather than a state of frantic deficit. Your energy is no longer a draining battery you nervously monitor, but a deep well you draw from with absolute confidence. This creates a life of beautiful, sustainable rhythm, rather than a soul-crushing, endless routine. The modern world will always be loud, your inbox will always be full, and unexpected crises will inevitably arise to challenge you. But the Sabbath becomes an unbreakable anchor in the middle of that swirling, chaotic storm. Even if Tuesday is a disaster and Thursday brings terrible news, You can breathe through it because you know the sanctuary is coming. You have built an impregnable fortress in time, and absolutely nothing can stop that sun from setting and your rest from beginning. This is your formal invitation to step off the endless, exhausting treadmill of modern expectation. You were not put on this earth just to pay bills, answer emails, and die quietly under a mountain of unread notifications. You are not a machine designed to be optimized, monetized, and relentlessly upgraded until your gears finally grind to a halt. You are a living, breathing human being, and your inherent worth is not dictated by your daily economic output. It is time to radically reclaim your stolen humanity and aggressively defend your right to simply exist. If this entire message resonated with you, I need you to think of one specific person right now who is actively burning out. Send them the link to this full 5-part playlist, because this ancient rhythm might be the exact lifeline they desperately need. I'm also challenging you to commit to a 4-week Sabbath experiment, carving out just 1 day of total rest a week. Come back to the comments section on this exact video in a month and tell me how it changed your life. Finally, please hit that subscribe button so we can continue building a life of intention, purpose, and deep, radical rest together.